As a religious leader that prides itself in a religion which sought to explain truths in the world, to say that our interpretation of the world is the most correct, we think at a point in time where you discover that all of these pent up beliefs are found to be false and even to the point found to be harmful, we think the only morally sound decision to make in this debate is to leave that religion and as much as possible be the antithesis to the radical religion that you are. The first thing I would want to do is to define what radicalism is in this debate. We think radicalism is can be a lot of things. It can be extremism. It can also be having dogmas, for example, that promote things like violence or even hateful narratives towards other religions or towards other particular individuals, like a sect of people, like LGBT groups of people, for example. This can be in the form of dogmas, for example, or even in the rituals or in the sacrifices that you do. This can also look like a lot of evil or nefarious requirements, such as urging your people to go to religious wars or cutting down non-believers, for example, or even to the worst and extreme sense, even things like human sacrifices. What we're going to posit is in all of its forms. We think that kind of truth must be revealed to your people as much as possible. We think the goal of this debate for opening government is number one, to take ourselves out, first of all, out of that nefarious situation. And then we think the second goal is for us to uphold the moral truth, both on the personal perspective and even externally towards our constituents and to those who we owe our cult of personality to. That notice that this goal is void of any practical outcome. The fact that we are able to uphold moral truth is already a marginal benefit for opening government. But thirdly, and quite less in this debate, is that we will also try as much as possible to convince people out in a much safer space where we don't have to be threatened by this religion. I think the burden then that opposition has to defend in this debate, given that they should stay in that religion and still pretend to be its interpreter of the truth of that religion, even if to an extent they make it progressive. I think the burden of opposition in this debate is number one, to lie to their constituents and even to lie to themselves. The only way they can maintain truth and that they can still represent that religion, especially when a lot of their people are conservatives, which means that they're probably originalists in the interpretations of their dogmas, means they have to make certain concessions here and there, even out of their personal beliefs. But number two, I think this is far worse, is they have to create an idealized version of what a progressive Dharma religion should be that's based only solely on their own conception of progressivism, and they have to feed that towards their constituents. I think the model we'll take in this debate is we'll leave, take a safe refuge, and we'll also convince as much as possible to make people leave this religion as well. The first argument I will prove is why leaving is the only morally sound decision to make in this debate. How do we best uphold that moral truth? And this is void of any pragmatic impacts in this debate. Firstly, why religious leaders have an obligation towards the truth. We think, firstly, religion is a greatly momentous decision. That is, when you want to when you want to subscribe to a certain religion, it doesn't only become a hobby for you. Religion becomes something that's so central, so core to the way people live their lives. That is to say that a lot of the decisions they make, the choices they make, the clothes they wear, the people they end up being with, even the food they eat, all of these things become linked to the type of religion and to the type of dogmas that this religion is espousing towards these individuals. And we think leaders have a very high threshold and have a very high burden to fulfill. I think there are two reasons for that. The first reason is there's a great deal of responsibility of trust, which is there's a great deal of responsibility which is based on the trust and presumed trust and presumed believability that people give to them. That is, when people listen to you, they're not listening to you as someone who is at their level. They're listening to you as someone who probably knows more about how to interpret those because they presume you to have spent hours and even your life trying to read those dogmas, unlike they who probably don't read it all the time as much as you do. But more than that, I think the reason why leaders have a higher level of responsibility is because religion and leaders at that as well as an extension of that religion, employ a lot of methods in order to maintain a message and an image of infallibility. That's why in Christianity, for example, there are specific doctrines that say the Pope and whatever he says is representative of the religion and what our beliefs are, or even leaders themselves become so strict and so conservative because they want to maintain that image of infallibility, because that's the only way they can get sacrifices out of their individuals. I think then that what it leads to is an environment where leaders often have a monopoly of interpretation over the dogmas of that religion. And I think the harm of this debate then is, I think, for UP, when they choose to stay in that religion, I think constituents wouldn't have been able to make this decision for themselves. Constituents, especially when you lie to them, would probably be interpreting this originalist interpretations and would never have found that radicalism was bad because you as a leader continue to propagate these ideals towards them. More than that, at opposition, they also have to defend people not just ascribing to their religion, but ascribing to the new version of that religion, which you would ultimately create, which is your burden when you stay in that religion. I think the impact of this, what happens is that every single injustice which is an extension of the radicalism found in your religion, is not only ascribed to that religion, but to you as the leader personally, to your very own moral principles. And we think that's not something that you should be living by. But more than that, and this is probably far worse for opposition, you command people to make great personal commitments, to make great personal sacrifices like leaving loved ones behind, leaving their favorite food behind, for example, or even when it comes to radical decisions, even killing other members of the community. And it's not because of the religion, but it's because you said so. Because you made them believe, for example, that you had a monopoly over this religion, and because at opposition, when you stay, you interpret it in your own idea, in your own version of progressivism, which is not just an ascription towards a religion, but to your words personally as a leader. I don't think you should be able to do that. But secondly, then, and this is where we prove the pragmatic benefit, why is the act of leaving effective at convincing people to rethink their religion and their conservatism towards this religion? Why are we marginally better at convincing people to opt out? I think the first reason is the act of leaving is a great shock against the majority of people who are conservatives. Note that if you read the motion slide, most of these people who live there are either most of the people who live there are conservatives. And I think the very core of conservatism is that it requires a lot of conformity, to be silenced, for example, not to go towards what's progressive in the modern world, but to believe that religion as it is. That means upholding your responsibilities. Leaving is something that's so significantly different from that it's a major shock to individuals. But more than that, because you also serve as an antithesis, not someone who makes concessions. We're very proud to propose. Thanks.
Thank you. We now welcome the Leader of Opposition.
Am I audible? Am I visible? I will begin in 3, 2, 1. Dear panel, several years ago, I was at the outskirts of the radical settlement called Yitzhar. I was walking with Palestinian farmers who were trying to get to their lands while the radical settlers were trying to beat them and their children up. Now, with me were a group called Rabbis for Human Rights. One of them, on that occasion, was actually stabbed by one of the radical settlers. Now, here's the thing. Both the radical settlers and the rabbi that was stabbed by them were a part of the same religion. They believed in the same God. They believed in the same ideas. And here's the thing. This is what I'm going to show you today. That there is no such thing as a nature of religion. Because all OG can talk to you about is about the truth about the religion. I will explain why this simply doesn't exist. Later, I will move on to explain to you what might you care about as the subject of this debate, and why all these considerations don't lead to leaving the religion. Before that, a few points of rebuttal to what we just heard from the Prime Minister. Firstly, he tells us religious leaders have an obligation to the truth. Right. That's why they all lost faith when they found out that snakes and donkeys can talk, and after they found out that seas don't open up in two. No, they are dealing with faith, with the idea of believing in something, even if it is demonstrably false. They are not obligated to the truth. The basic responsibility of religious priests is not to the truth, it is to better people's lives through faith. And again, faith is not about truth. In fact, it's quite often the exact opposite. Then they tell us the constituents don't get the right to know that this religion is radical and to decide on themselves to leave. Who the hell said that priests should give their believers choices? That assumption comes from secular society where we believe that people make the best decisions for themselves. That's not true of religions. In religions, you are a pastor and you have your sheep. You need to do is guide them to the right place. Then lastly, they tell you if you leave, a lot of people will leave with you because it will be a shock to the entire religion and so on. Notice that if this was true about this particular religion, then that religion simply would not have survived the centuries that it has. Obviously, every religion has power struggles and it has people leaving over these power struggles. And if it were true that every person who left the religion made a vast majority or enough, a critical mass of people leave with them, then the religion simply wouldn't have survived this far. Okay, into my first point, there is no such thing as the nature of religion, again, in engagement with the entire truth point of OG. So notice that religions are belief systems based in texts. Every text is subject to interpretation, and no interpretation of the text is inherently truer. And that means that what you actually discovered through your years of studying these texts is the interpretation of previous religious leaders. And of course, ancient religious leaders who are the ones who interpreted the text would be more radical in modern terms because they lived 500 or 1,000 years ago. That doesn't mean that the religion itself is inherently radical. But let's take OG on their best side. Even if there is such a thing as a truer interpretation, inherently truer interpretation of the religious text, what really matters is how people follow the tenets of the religion, what people do because they believe in their religion, not what the true nature of the religion is. Now, not only that what people do today isn't bad, that they're not as opening government tried to tell you kill their wives or whatever because they're radical. As the info slide tells us, they're actually mostly moderate, and there are some extremists on the fringes. But even more than that, it is not likely that it will become worse or more radical because the trajectory of the development of religions is according to the surrounding society and to the material and historical situation that it is in, not according to its true nature. If it were the case that the true nature tells us what a religion would look like, then we wouldn't have prosperity gospel of people pertaining to believe in Jesus, but saying that Jesus told everyone that as long as you're rich, God loves you. This is the exact opposite of what Jesus Christ said. So obviously, if religions would have developed according to the true nature of religions, then obviously you would have a lot more socialist than neoliberal Christians today. And then also, all this means that you actually can change the religion for the better. And because it changes according to society. Before I continue, I would love to take closing if you have an extension,
All right, you say that religion is subject to interpretation, but it is untrue because you must have discovered something indubitable on our side. Otherwise, your belief would not have been shaken that much. Info slide
please.
says your belief has already been lost.
Thank you. Even if there is such a thing, which is on you to explain why, it still doesn't matter because what matters is how people follow the religion. Now, all I've shown you is that you can actually change the religion, but even more than that, at the very least, You believe that you can do this. And this is what is important, that you feel like you can do something to change the religion for good. You know, if, since you lost your faith, you know that you have led people astray. But now you can spend the rest of your life trying to change the religion towards a better idea of the world. Notice that um, that means that even if you have no faith, at least you can have meaning for your life. Since we show you that there is no true meaning of religion, even if there is there is, it doesn't matter. It matters what people do. We call on you to oppose the motion.
Thank you. We now welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi, can I be heard? Thank you so much. I'll just set up my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, years. It's time to cut the cord and talk about essentially what
Okay, sorry, can I just cut you?
changes you need to make in your life and in your belief to account for the new information applications.
Okay, DLSU, DPM, we can't hear you. I think there might be an internet issue. I'm just gonna stop the clock and assume you should just begin the speech again. Perhaps everyone can turn off their cameras, just at least for this speech, to reduce bandwidth. So DPM, can you just confirm that you can hear us?
Hi, I can hear you, but can I not be heard?
You can be heard now. So just please repeat the speech from the start. I'm starting the clock again. Cool.
Okay. Sorry for that.
No worries.
Philippine Wi-Fi.
All right.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In what is presumably a lifelong pursuit for what is behind the mask of the universe and who is the face of God, I think that when you realize that you've hit a dead end and you yourself have been walking astray, it is time to cut that cord and adjust your beliefs and adjust your worldview. Presumably, we're talking about somebody that cares a lot about these religions and a lot of the truth value at which that they are teaching. A few things that I want to clarify in response towards the previous speaker. Take note that what we're disputing here is not the actions associated with religion, but rather the basis of those beliefs and the basis of those actions. So whether or not you yourself or the religious leader involved is likely to believe the same things, want to be progressive, I think that those are things that are likely to stay the same on the both sides of the house. The difference is whether or not you want to attribute the current actions of your religion in the status quo or the current moral beliefs that you've had towards a basis that is wrong, doctrinally wrong, or do you want to contest that that doctrine is therefore radical and question whether or not we should look for a different basis in that regard? So on that, a few formal responses to the previous speaker. The way that they tried to respond to us was to talk about the obligation of religious leader. They simply said that there is no obligation towards the truth because religion can't be proven true. And a lot of times they still do believe in things like, for example, the ocean not being able to part and therefore they don't have an obligation to truth. I think that this is quite simply not true because take note that the motion takes the perspective of an individual who is likely religious and likely wholeheartedly believes that the ocean was parted, believes that donkeys and snakes at the time through miracles were able to talk. So in that regard, that is still a truth for the actors and the perspectives involved within the motion. So yeah, so sure, it may not be true towards a secular perspective or to somebody who doesn't believe in that religion, but the obligation to truth is still present and fulfilled towards an individual who absolutely believes a lot of these doctrines and these stories to be true. So in that regard, the obligation of religious leaders to truth is likely still present. And take note that a lot of the basis as to why we told you that truth is an absolute value in today's debate isn't solely based off of religions. It is also based off of the moral implications of individuals making massive amounts of sacrifices towards their daily life, making personal and momentous decisions on how exactly they ought to live their life, because of those lies that you're spreading. And because you understand that that is a lie, you are now morally responsible for a lot of the corresponding actions and even unjustified actions that exist as a result of it. So, on that regard, you must assume the value of truth and the pursuit of truth to still be a value in today's debate. But on their value, their claim was that there's no such thing as the true nature of religion. Therefore, switching and swaying that religion to form your progressive ideals is still something that is then therefore justified. Number one, I think this assumes the point of view that someone who didn't wholeheartedly believe in their interpretation. And as was correctly pointed out by closing government in the POI, the motion presumes that you have lost faith not just in the actions that you try to spread, which are presumably progressive, but the basis of the sacrifice and the basis of the moral worldviews that you then therefore hold. So in that regard, we must assume that regardless of whether or not you believe that there is a true nature of religion, the individuals involved belief in the basis of that religion is something that is challenged. But number two, his claim, the claim of the previous speaker was simply that religions are becoming more progressive. I think that this is not contentious in today's debate. This is a debate about whether or not progressivism or conservatism is the correct way for religions to be, or which one is more valuable. I think this is a debate about what you ought to do and what is the moral responsibility of the individual who is making that choice. And given that you are likely to have decided that there is a disjunct between the current progressive interpretation that you see the religion as and its actual basis, I think that you understand that if you want to fulfill those actions, you need to pursue a different basis for that worldview. And given that, I don't think that a lot of the material is particularly relevant towards the actor involved. Before I move on, I'll take a POI from closing.
What you discovered isn't that the religion is false, but it is violent. Your response to this cognitive dissonance is to renounce your faith. That means that going against violence is the most important thing to you, not truth.
Okay. So this is what that conclusion does. If you find out that it's violent but still true, if you tell them the wrong things, then the carrot and the stick incentives that most religions have, like for example hell, like for example heaven, or even disfavor from a god, are things that you are damning the entire populace towards. So I think that is a moral harm that you will be put on your conscience as well. But number two, I think that if you have lost faith, I think that what that means is that you value more not the God that you believe in, but then the actions that you think that that God supports. So in that regard, the option now becomes whether or not you want to find a new God that support or a new religion that supports the worldview, not only in the current actions of the people within that religion, but also in its doctrinal basis, and therefore have a larger understanding of that truth and that benefit. What is my extension? I'm going to talk about the obligation that this individual has towards themselves. Because this note that the motion takes the perspective of an individual making that decision. So that individual, as an actor, also has corresponding obligations and burdens that teams in this round must cater towards. Number one, I think that you are likely to avoid immense feelings of guilt. And take note that you are likely a moral person because of your leanings towards religion. So with higher senses of guilt due to that moral compass, what are the harms that are likely to accrue? I think that the guilt of just spreading a lie, which in most religions is often attributed towards something that is inherently evil, I think itself is something that is likely to keep you up at night. But number two, I think that the looming threat in your mind of damning constituents to the negative incentives of religion, whether it is hell or disfavor from your God that causes things like natural calamities, is a guilt and the moral responsibility that you take onto yourself. And given that you are religious, you believe this harm to be true. But number two, even as a non-believer, Pascal's major says that the harm of an eternal disfavor is infinite, therefore important no matter how slim the chance on whether or not you actually or truly and fully believe in it. So what that means is that you're likely to take on immense feelings of guilt as also immense feelings of moral reprehensiveness towards yourself. But number two, I think you're going to find it difficult to pursue other religions and truths that are presumably important to you as an individual because you dedicated your life to it. So it's very difficult to pursue the truth when you're learning about other religions seems like you're discrediting your own, or you can't find the time, or you can't fully commit towards other religions because you refuse to renounce your current one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hello, audible? Is my messy room visible? I hope not. Okay, I will begin in 3, 2, 1, 3 short points of rebuttal, and then a far further explanation on the change. What is the change, why you believe you can do the change, and why therefore you will choose to do the change, and what is the comparative, what is the likely response of people within the religion once you turn your back on the religion. Let's get right into it. First of all, OG are confused regarding whether you lost your faith entirely or not. If you lost your faith entirely, you no longer believe in doctrine or in God, then you no longer believe that it's the truth. And what matters is whether you change reality or not, and change reality based on your own personal ideals. If you don't totally lose your religion, then you believe that there is a change that can be made in the religion, that there is a change that could be made in the religion. Odds are you believe that God is guiding you to this revelation and to making the change, and you feel like you have an obligation not only to your flock, but to God as well. Next point of rebuttal on the idea of guilt. We say, you'll feel guilty for leading people astray. Now you have to change it, to fix it. And you don't do that if you leave. You're just abandoning people. Now you might say, oh, I'll leave and then I'll shout at them, it was all a lie. But that's not letting people down easily. That's making people go, what? Who is this traitor? Ignore you and move on to more radical alternatives. Finally, they're on the definition of radical. They talk to us about human sacrifices. That's wrong. Radical isn't murderous, like radical feminism, right? Radical just means connected to the origins. And the origins of just about every religion currently practiced in the world have some dark shit in them, like really negative stuff, like killing people just for being themselves. So viewing your religion as radical just means that it doesn't mean that you learn something new about your religion. It means that you now see this thing, which until now you accepted, as being no longer in touch with reality, too connected to the origins, and therefore radical, something that you believe should be changed, even if you still believe in the religion and God. We think that's a more likely option, although of course we win against opening opposition on both options. So let's get into the changes. First of all, a quick example on the Pope. The Pope said about gay people, who am I to say to someone who was created by God and feels love, that their love is false? However, in the Bible and in most of Christian history, it says that a man who does upon another man what should be done upon a woman, it's the Bible talking, it's not my words, should be killed. Okay, so that means that Pope Francis thinks that something clearly written in the Bible is false. He still believes in God, but he doesn't believe in ancient doctrine. He doesn't believe that the Bible is literally the word of God, and he believes that the religion can change and advance to modern era. So why do you believe you can create change? As a prominent leader, for example, like, you know, one of the top 3 people in a religion, you have 2 ways to create change. First of all, your job. If you're the head of if you're the chief cardinal and head of instruction, you can affect how students are taught in schools and in clerical schools worldwide. Secondly, your prestige. Your interpretations will be studied by clerics and by members of the religion. Your sermons will spread worldwide. Even mainstream media is likely to publish you. The Dalai Lama is a multiple times New York bestseller. People like hearing the opinions of prominent leaders. Secondly, you are very aware of your own influence. You have done jobs before and you saw how much control you had. You decided what you want to advance within the religion, and you saw that your ability to affect the religion increases as you advance in the ranks. Thirdly, why you believe you can create change is that you believe that God likely guided you to a position of power in the event that you still believe in God. You believe that he likely guided you to this revelation that there is an inherent flaw in the religion and ideally would want you to fix it and change it. And lastly, you see people around you within your religion becoming more progressive, as the motion states, with a large minority already being progressive. You know that people can believe in this religion and become modernized. So why? Once you are capable of making that, you believe you are capable of making a change, why do you want to implement it? One, because you care about the religion itself. This religion was a home to you. You loved it. And if you can fix something that you love, that has been everything to you, you should before you abandon it. If you're in a relationship that was amazing and the relationship is starting to turn sour, before you say, okay, I'm up and leaving, here's all the problems I had with you, you say, let's try and fix this. Let's try and see if we can talk about the problems and make this better. Secondly, because you know the religion as in-depthly as possible. You understand the philosophy of it deeply. That means that you found an objective fatal flaw in it. And if you do care about the truth, or at least about consistency within a philosophical or theological idea, which odds are you do, since you're a prominent cleric and you studied all the scriptures, that means that you want other people to know. Just like, okay, whatever. I hope that's clear enough. Thirdly, you have an obligation to your own mentors, the people who taught you, the people who vouched for you, the people who raised you through the ranks so that you will one day lead the people that they so care about. And lastly, an obligation to the religion members themselves. They depend on you. They trust you. They will follow your slow movements towards progressiveness because they don't understand the nuances of scripture. They understand the nuances of this is the leader that I follow and that I trust. Finally, why back to the point that I just understood what I missed there. If you care about, you want people to behave in a way that's closer to the truth, and simply telling them, this is the fatal flaw I found, this is why I no longer believe in this and these essential things in the religion, screw all of you, and I encourage you all to leave the religion, people are unlikely to listen to it, right? So let's get quickly into the comparative of if you leave, what changes. One, the people within feel abandoned and hurt. Someone they looked up to, someone they believed in, is now actively encouraging people to leave the religion. This is the kind of thing that creates a deep split within a religion. The religious leaders want to maintain unity against you by encouraging people to quit the religion. Closing, Gabby PY. Okay, no POI from closing. People within feel abandoned and hurt. The religious leaders want to maintain unity against you by encouraging, since you are now the biggest threat to this religion. What does that mean? It means that they're likely to become more extreme in the other direction. They're likely to say, no, all of this is bad. Ignore this person. This person is the devil. This is no longer someone who's like who's pushing everyone further to the left from within, like a Bernie Sanders. This is more of a narco-communist who's just trying to destroy the world. I'm mentioning my partner Liach. So that means that they're likely to become extreme in the other direction, to try and erase your legacy both within and outside of the religion, with most moderate believers wanting to see you as a traitor and accepting this extremism, taking the whole religion further from where you want. So why are these changes so important? Because in a global world, religion leads to violence, and if you can get a delta in hate towards outsiders, that is a delta in the likelihood of violence. It is important because many of the people within the religions are treated badly, like women in patriarchal religions, and you can help them. And it makes the religion appropriate for the modern world and lets the good things within it continue to survive. For all of these reasons, we are very proud to propose.
Thank you. Member of government, please.
Can I just go and quickly use the washroom? I'll just take 15 seconds. Cool. Can I be heard? Hello. Can everyone hear me? All right, I will start in just 10 seconds. Let me start my timer. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think the opening half has got this debate that you have, that you must do it because it is the only morally sound decision. But we don't think that's super important because it's just a general principle. We must examine the benefits and harms to the leader in question because it is about a personal value judgment and not a principle. It's an actor motion, as also O kind of points out. I think opening opposition misses the debate when they argue about change. I don't think change is a central consideration in the debate. The central consideration in the debate should be about the well-being and the happiness of the person that is in question. And here's where we introduce our extension, right? How do we ensure better well-being and better happiness of the religious leader in question? First of all, on their side, you must understand that this person is going to undergo a tremendous form of cognitive dissonance because the info slide reads that you have lost your faith in that religion, and their comparative of the Pope doesn't apply. First of all, the Pope is an infallible, central, highest leader of the religion. Here we're just talking about a prominent leader. There can be tens or hundreds of prominent leaders in a religion. The magnitude doesn't matter. That magnitude doesn't match up. Second, Pope still believes in Christianity in general. You, on the other hand, believe that the religion is radical in and of itself, and you have lost your belief. So this is the type of person that we're talking about. This preacher feels betrayed by God because he's strongly anti-radical. Otherwise, he would have a third option of just preaching the religion as it is. Therefore, once you believe that you no longer have faith in that religion, you no longer have faith in that scripture, but you have to get up every morning, go up to a pedestal and see hundreds of people and then preach the religion you have no faith in to those people, sugarcoat some of the things in the scripture. That is going to have a tremendous toll on your emotional well-being because it takes a huge amount of emotional labor to hide your innate feelings, to hide all of the things that you feel and say something else consistently. You have to act like you believe in that religion in every step of the way because you're a prominent leader, because people come to your house to pray, because people come to your house and say, how do I do this according to my religion? You act like you're a leader of that religion, but you have no faith. And that is shattering to a person on an emotional level because it takes a huge amount of emotional toll, because all of us want a consistent image of ourselves, and this is what you don't get on their side of the house because you have to pretend to be someone else in public. You have to be someone when you are at your own, and that is a sort of contradiction that you can't resolve on your side. It is a mortal struggle against yourself every breathing moment. Second, what will life in refuge look like in our world? And opening government does not talk about this at all. Understand that this is a prominent leader that we're talking about. This means you will be able to find a government-insured refuge in Western liberal democracies because you can claim to be a religious refugee who has been kicked out of the country because of religious reasons, because you think it's risky for you to disavow your religion in a country where most of the people living in that country follow that religion. Most Western liberal democracies will take you in and put you in a nice pedestal. You have media who will be interested because you're a contrarian, and contrarians gather crowd, and contrarians are often interesting people that media always wants to talk to. This is why you have people like Ayan Hirsi Ali, people like Irshad Manji, who get a lot of attention from media, not because they're amazing intellectuals, just because they're ex-Muslims who have criticism of Islam to offer, and the media loves it. You will be safe in that country where you go. You will not have to feel threatened, right? You will not feel like you've betrayed anyone because now you can speak your voice. You can say what you feel. You won't have to fight against yourself. There are two impacts of this. First, on your deathbed in our world, you can find solace and you can tell yourself that I tried. I was not a hypocrite to the rest of the world. I had a consistent image of myself. Second, you'll not force yourself into cognitive dissonance day in and day out. Now let's look at opening opposition case and break that down. They tell you that religious texts are subject to interpretation and you can just interpret that in a different form. We don't think that is the debate because you must have discovered something indubitable for your belief to be shaken to the core and for you to have lost your faith. The info slide says you have lost your faith. Second, they tell you that you can change the religion from inside, and the comparative is the religion becomes more radical. First of all, I think it's a moot point because you have left the religion, you no longer identify with it. So radicalism in that religion isn't necessarily your biggest concern because I really don't care about Zionists because I'm not a Jew, right? And that is how you see it because now you're an ex-Dharmist. You don't identify with that religion. So radicalism in that religion doesn't really feel like it's your fault. But at least you're trying and you can still satisfy yourself on that ground in their world. Here's 5 reasons why you can't make that religion more progressive. First, because religions tend to be inert because of historical interpretations that are dominant within religion and that are generally radical in nature. Second, more conservatives than progressive exist in all religion. As in info slide it is said, leaders appeal to broader bases, which means far more prominent leaders will have conservative interpretations than leaders who will share the interpretation that you have. I'll take CO if they have anything.
You grew up all your life in a structure that told you that your service is the most important thing, that made your personal value about service to your community. You're unlikely to completely change this. It's still not important to you, your own welfare and your own well-being.
I think there are moments in life where we have an epiphany that changes our lives forever. And this is a point like this. Not all of us have that moment, but people who do, and if they can't reconcile that epiphany with their past self, then they have to like battle among their past and future selves for the rest of their lives. We say go with your future self. Don't have that battle with your past and future self trying to reconcile both of them. Just go with your future self. I think that's a better mental state to be in. Third reason why you can't get more progress. Because to get more money and to get political influence in a religion, you need more followers to have stronger faith in the religion. This is why most preachers are likely to teach a stronger doctrinal form of belief, and doctrinal form of belief is always more conservative. Fourth, it may be life-threatening to you if you stay in a religious country and preach a progressive form of faith, because conservative leaders don't like progressive faith taught in that country. The comparative is on our world, you can go to a different country where you feel safe when you do that, and therefore you have a stronger appeal because you have media, you have social media, and you have other sorts of outlets that come to you. The fifth reason why you can't get change, you have no conviction. Religious leaders get charisma and get their potency as people who can change belief because they have conviction in the word of God. You have lost that conviction. You know you are lying, and therefore you will not be able to convince people that much because you yourself are not convinced that this religion is progressive, and therefore you don't get the progressivism that they talk about on their side, and the radicalism that they talk about is also something that is mutually not exclusive, and therefore we're extremely proud to propose.
Thank you. We now welcome the member of opposition.
Okay, starting in just a second. Three, two, one. I have quite a lot of extension, so I'm going to talk fairly quickly. I apologize for that. 3 points in my speech. Rebuttal will be integrated. First point about characterizing the actor in this motion, what is important to them, how they believe they can achieve their goals. Secondly, why they have more influence than inside the religious apparatus than outside of it. Thirdly, why they're likely to believe they have a reasonable chance to influence the believers with their advocacy against extremism, against violence. Rebuttal will be integrated. First point about characterization of that person. As we know in a POI, which is important, you didn't lose your faith because you discovered that the religion was false. You did it because you realized it's violent, right? That made you lose your faith. That made you consider losing your way of life and your career, something you built for decades and decades. That means that anti-violence is the thing that is the most important to you, not truth, which isn't really part of this debate. This is a value that you have that doesn't come from the religion because you want to leave the religion, and that is more important to you. Specifically, it's more important to you and you feel responsible to guide people in your way to act in the world against violence. Why is that true? And this is in direct engagement with CG, what's more important to you. why it's like you that the influence of the world is the thing that is important to you. You are a spiritual leader and you still consider yourself one because you're considering both of these options. That means that your self-value, your self-perception is as a person who is leading other people to moral behavior as you perceive it in your old set of values. This is reinforced by years and years and years of service within that community, within that religion, that meant that your like material well-being was simply unimportant, right? And that's a message that is inherent within the religion, specifically on how members of the religion of the clerical action needed to act. Like this is something that reinforced you for years of your life. It's simply unlikely that this is simply goes away from your mind. This is still how you perceive yourself as opposed to the world and your goal and the world. You may have lost your faith, but your brain wasn't wiped. You still think in the same general ways. So this is why it's still the things that you decide how to act in the world. You want to influence the world. You want to make other people more moral. You want to guide them because that is what you do. That is who you are. Specifically, since your value is anti-violence, this is the value that you want to lead people towards. What is important to you is the capability for that advocacy and your influence against violence, which means that the question in this debate is simply where you have more of a chance of that influence inside or outside the religious apparatus. Here's why you have more of a chance for an influence from within. 7 mechanisms of extension. First, when you abandon your ministry and position, you let go of the state and the resources that come with that stage to reach followers. You abandon physical access to the followers and the believers and day-to-day connection with them. You let go of the authority and the trust that followers put in that specific authority to tell them how to lead your life. You lose insider access to clerical like councils of the higher ups in that religion, that there are the people, there are the places that write the religious decrees and dogma and verdicts that serve as the precedent as to how that religion plays out in the world generations hence. You are declared as a heretic, and there's a huge ostracization from other leaders in your community. They tell to the followers that person speaks against the religion, which is what the option specifically says. No, you may have said that, you never said any of the other things, which means you lose the trust of the followers, and you lose spiritual and material influence on the lower ranking clerics within your hierarchy, which means you don't get to dictate what they say. Another point is in option B, your chance of increasing your audience is way larger, right? Because you start from the amount of followers that you have in status quo, and you can expand from there. In option A, when you leave the religion, that is your maximum, that is your ceiling. You are really, really unlikely to gain more followers because of that ostracization, because of that propaganda against you from other leaders within the religion. This is a massive amount of reasons why you're likely to want to stay within that apparatus, because you have way more access and influence that way. Before I continue to why that access will actually be successful, or you actually be able to sway people to your beliefs, let's take OG.
So if your claim is true, that you still believe that the religion is true, but then you see it as radical, then teaching anything but the radical nature of that religion is likely to damn them to the
Truth
negative
or
effects
lies
of
are
that
simply
religion.
not a clash in this debate. You don't ascribe a truth value to a religion, you ascribe a morality value to a religion, and then you decide that this religion is not moral because it is violence. That means that violence is the criteria with which you make the decision, not factual truth. Let's talk about chances of success of persuading of your advocacy. We think that it is likely, and therefore you want to go for that, especially in the comparative, right? Now, as OO say, every religion is capable of being interpreted in different ways, but specifically note here an important point that they miss. The violent messaging of that religion was hidden from you, a prominent spiritual leader, for decades of your life, and you suddenly understood that. That means that the violent messaging of the religion isn't as prominent, which means that you are likely to be able to succeed to advance other interpretations of the religion, specifically to a wider audience that doesn't have your scripture knowledge, that doesn't have your decades of understanding, and therefore isn't likely to be primed towards interpreting them in radical, violent ways. Also note that people don't really want to believe in violence, right? People don't want a violent society. Some people are actually, like a lot of people, really afraid of the sight of blood. That means that the messaging against violence is something that's likely to resonate with people, and therefore you're likely to be successful with that. And a comparative point: if you leave the religion and the stage and the authority, you leave all of these to the other guys, the other prominent leaders of that religion that have your same background and have the same understanding of the scripture, realize that it's violent, but are fine with it. The people who will ostracize you if you speak against the religion. That means you leave the stage only to them, only to your interpretations, and therefore, in comparative, your followers, your audience, your believers will be slanted more toward violence. This is abhorrent to you. This is immoral to you, and you want to prevent that. You want to stay where you have the most influence and where that influence is likely to be successful. For these reasons, oppose.
Thank you. We now welcome the government whip.
Hi, am I audible? Yeah, I'm going to start. Just preparing my responses. Yeah, give me a moment. Yeah, so 3, 2, 1. Let's reframe this motion, right? Understand like what the motion reads. You lost your faith not because you thought the religion is violent. You lost your faith because you thought the religion is radical. The wording of the motion is important because radical does not equate to being violent. Radical means like you being intolerant of certain progressive beliefs, like not being tolerant of gay rights, not being progressive when it comes to looking at women. We think all of these things add to the fact that you also think this religion is violent, and we think therefore the most of the analysis that closing up gives us is somewhat redundant in this debate. But let's move on to engagement, right? First, they tell us that anti-violence is the most important for me as the person, right? Number one, the first step of being anti-violent is to reject a violent value system. On our side, you can be even stronger on anti-violence because the narrative you set is that you don't need to sugarcoat what is actually you think is super violent and super harmful for the people that are actually in it, right? So which means that you have a greater threshold of feeling like, yeah, I'm in a place where I'm rejecting those beliefs because they're hurtful, and therefore I might have a greater outreach or like have like greater honesty with myself. Second, I'll be celebrated within religious diasporas. I'll be celebrated in individuals that reconvert and become more progressives, right? I'll still have a following in that sense because I am a person with enough popularity to begin with, right? That's where I start. Moving on, they tell us that I'm going to lose my physical access and platform. Fundamentally, we don't think it's important, right? Because what's more important to me right now is living in a relatively safe space, right? Where I can dictate and be in a place where I can feel safe of like expressing my own beliefs and being with people who I don't associate with that religion. But beyond that, let's assume that I want to reach out to that audience, right? We think Western media can give you that. We think Western media arguably has bigger audiences and better funds because they are developed democracies, right? On upside, when you become more progressive, things become worse for you because other conservative preachers will call you out, right? Because understand that your religion comprises of multiple leaders at once. If you're the person who's saying that your religion is more progressive, other leaders will capitalize on it, and they're going to let your followers know that what you're preaching is essentially the wrong version of religion, in which case you lose your followers because they feel motivated, because they are, by the way, vast majority of them, super conservative, and they like super conservative messaging. So we think that harm is symmetric in their world as well. Second, understand you'll face threats from extremists, and this is perhaps the most important, crucial piece of analysis. This religion that you support has extremists. The country that you're preaching that religion in presumably has those extremists too. In which case, if you are the person out of nowhere starts to preach about progressive rights, starts to say that LGBTQ people have a distinct opinion and has a place in your religion, you're fundamentally going to raise more chances of you being murdered right in the middle of the streets. That's what happened when two gays Pakistani imam were killed. That's what happens in Pakistan. That's what happened in Pakistan, and we think that's more likely to happen in a world where you're branded as a heretic. Now, let's move on to what OO talks about, right? OO's main claim is that you don't have, you're more responsible for your faith, and somehow that, you being more, you preaching your faith will lead to individuals believing in the version of religion that you want. The problem is the devout followers will not care for the message you're trying to spread, because as they say, the trajectory of religion is based on the stuff its followers believe in. Well, flash news, the vast majority of people who follow this religion also worship those radical texts. So if you were to assume that religion will follow the trajectory of the vast majority of its followers, the vast majority of its followers following those radical texts means that you have a less power and less of a bargaining chip to actually change their minds. Because even if you think those ancient texts are somewhat fundamentally different, the impact is these individuals don't think the same way. Before I move on, QICO.
All these responses are simply lacking, and the response about Western media is simply lacking in explaining all of the other means of mechanism or influence that you lose if you choose these options. This simply isn't enough to explain why you have more influence on your side.
We have more influence because you feel safer being in a place where you feel like if you have a controversial opinion, you're not going to be straight up knifed in the middle of the street. You feel more safe because in your world, essentially, more leaders are going to prop up and say that the brand of religion you're trying to follow is incorrect and goes against the ideals and the ancient texts that the religion has, religious followers have followed for centuries. We think it's more unsafe for you because no one is going to listen to you at the end of the day, and you're only going to open yourself up for more criticism. But let's take this a step further, right? Let's assume that your progressive stance will lead to some sort of change in your world. What happens then? Understand religion by definition is followed by large groups of people. Large groups of people act differently, meaning you're probably going to create more division in your inner circle because some pockets of people will actually buy into your progressive stance whilst others will reject it. In which case, you create essentially more inner group conflict. In which case, more people who feel like the radical version of your religion is correct will probably slide into subtle forms of radicalism. This doesn't happen overnight, but this will probably look like you feeling like it's all right for you thinking being in a subgroup where they say that LGBTQ people should be married, and you wanting to differentiate yourself from them and saying things like women shouldn't be allowed to marry based off their own free will, and probably they should take permission from their families and so on. We think these sorts of radicalism does not happen overnight, but they do happen when you try to differentiate yourself from others around you, in which case your progressive circles feel more progressive to you, and therefore you think to yourself that you need to create a distant metric. But beyond that, let's focus on what the primary aim of this debate is, in which case it's about the actor, right? What the actor wants. In our world, you get the well-being of that actor and you create more happiness, because when you're at your deathbed, that person right now in our world will say that could say that he lived an honest life, where he tried his moral best, where he tried his best to buy into people what he actually believed in, instead of having to sugarcoat verses and having to toil in the emotional labor of hiding his actual beliefs and promoting things that he necessarily does not want to partake himself in. In our world, you have that person has a more consistent image of himself. We think that in itself is a utilitarian good, and therefore we win. Very proud to propose.
Thank you. And we now welcome the last speaker of the round.
TAU, TAU.
I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Look, even though Mubarak himself explained to us in a clarification that the beliefs are violent, I think that if you replace the word violent with radical, our case still stands either way. So this is enough for us to win the debate. I'm going to have 3 questions in my speech. First of all, what are your goals as a person? Why is this the most important thing in this debate? Secondly, where do you affect more people? Lastly, where do we get less extremism? So let's start. What are your goals in this debate? Oh, gee, tell us, you need to be true with your religion and a really philosophical stance, right? First of all, it's unclear why this is true, but we also give analysis actually contradicting this, right? Because specifically the thing that drove you away from your entire belief system, your entire life system previously, was the radicalism, was the fact that now there is something that changes how you view your entire life before. So this means that this is the most important thing, because you are now betraying everything else that you knew beforehand. Secondly, we explained to you how advocacy works and why you still care about it deeply and affecting people to a large extent. And lastly, we explained to you why inherently this was a vague scenario, right? It's not that the violence just screams out from the text, because otherwise you would have discovered this 20 years ago. But the fact is that you can still be consistent with your religion, you can still speak truth, but without addressing this radicalism. This just means that this entire truth case doesn't stand, because there is not one truth in this religion, and you as a person don't care about the truth as much, but you care more about the radicalism and actually rejecting it, right? Then we get other metrics from CG. They tell us basically happiness of this person is the most important thing. Here, it's important to differentiate something that both governments don't understand. There is a difference between like your religion and your belief system, right? Because even if you don't believe in the religion anymore, you are still a human being. You still have a belief system. You still want to spread it out because of all of our material about advocacy and how important it is to you, and you're still able to speak the truth in those scenarios. So this means that most of your sermon will be speaking truth, and you won't feel like you're lying to yourself each and every minute of each and every day, because this is what most of your sermon would do. Then they tell us, look, you can solve this by, addressing a Western medium. No, this misses the point that radicalism is the thing that you want to contradict. If you approach only Western people that don't listen to your religion, it's not likely to change radicalism in the world. What does this show? This shows to you that we prove that the metrics in this debate is to prevent as many radicalism and violence from as many people. This changes the entire view of your debate, because this is an actor debate. So the most important thing for this person is the most important thing in this debate. But even if you don't accept this metrics, we're going to win over both government teams. First of all, over opening government, because the fact that you feel responsibility to how people interpret your values and not your religion means that you feel responsibility for the actions that they do with the values that they give them. If you persuade them not to be violent, this is enough for you to have enough of an influence which is important in your life. This again wins also closing, because closing tells you feel unsafe in your surroundings. You just think this is ridiculous, right? Because it's not that you're now going to say, look, all of what you believed in the religion is false. You're just going to say, look, treating LGBT in this way isn't the only way. There are other ways. You're going to interpret it from the scriptures themselves. You're just going to portray a progressive message. Guess what? The Pope does it, and he isn't threatened by being killed. I think that you will be fine as a person. This takes down most of what we get from government. Let's talk about where do we affect more people. So here's the thing: opening opposition. Tell us mainly, like you would say that this is a lie, and then people will stop believing you. In the case of how do you affect of how do you dissuade people, we showed you how small of a strength do you have once you renounce your religion and go abroad. And this just means that this is a much better dealing with government sides, because this shows that people are going to be so much less radical, right? So opening opposition basically tell us a lot of things about like messages, right? You're going to be portrayed as a traitor, and this is somewhat of a message to your believers. You're going to send messages through the media, and this will reach people. We actually tell you stuff that is more persuasive and how people are actually persuaded in things in the real world. First of all, you have an actual place where people can meet, and you can actually present your dogma to people face to face. We all know from Zoom conversations that this doesn't work as well as you have from face to face. Secondly, you lose it to someone else in your religion, which will have more power than you comparatively. This means that you're now less likely to have the follow of these people. Secondly, you have just much less resources to reach to a lot of people through temples. This means that the scale of your message is going to be so much smaller. Thirdly, you just have less effect on the level beneath you. Note, now you affect an entire branch of this religion, because you have hundreds or thousands of people that follow and listen to people that you preach to directly. This doesn't happen on the comparative. This just means that you have less power. But lastly, you just have less power over central decisions. The most important decisions in the religion, you don't have them in any way. This just means that we have much more likely impact under our side that explain you how we are able to dissuade people from this violence and radicalism. Before I go on, CG?
Khomeini has been able to send a revolution to Iran from exile. Armin Navabi of Atheist Republic has been extremely successful in getting converts. Why can't preachers do that due to stronger access to internet and guaranteed?
We just believe that internet is not enough, because a lot of people don't watch it, and because it's not together like face to face. We explained that. We just believe that an example isn't enough to win a debate. Then closing government give us stuff about how the religion is going to be splitted. First of all, it's new material in the web, but also it's just unclear why when it's split, it's just more divisive, because note, under the religion, you have more impact over people, because you are able to gather people from next to your branch, because they are going to get into your religion. Where do you have less experience? Opening the opposition tell us there are a lot of moderates today, and it's getting worse. We explain why a lot of people just listen to you more because they are afraid of violence and they want to believe this message. Why you have a unique power to change all of this. Why it's likely that you are going to flip people's opinions specifically regarding radicalism and violence. This just means that the amount of people that you're actually going to persuade is much larger, then we get much more impact and much more likelier impact. At the end of the day, this just means that you reach more people. I am so happy to oppose.
All right, thank you very much to the speakers.